Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Ames Public Library for this program, which is part of the 2026 History Lecture Series, brought to you through a partnership between Ames Public Library and Ames History Museum. I'm Kathy. I'm an adult services librarian here at APL. The library's mission is to connect you to the world of ideas, which we do through diverse and inclusive resources and programming. We also invite you to join us through future programs, which you can learn more about through our current issue of Page One or signing up for our events email. We have our Page One newsletter over there if you want to know more.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming in. I'm Alex. I'm the exhibits manager at the Ames History Museum, and I want to welcome everyone to our lecture tonight. And hello to everyone that's joining us online. We're happy to have this great partnership with Ames Public Library to be able to provide this lecture series in a hybrid format so you can watch it here in town or people from all over the world can watch us. Our mission is to engage our diverse public and provide unique opportunities to learn about Ames history. Our new and expanded Ames History Museum opened just over a year ago with a big expansion and renovation project. We now have 2 galleries, a community gathering space, reading and research room, on-site storage for all of our artifacts, and archival collections. Our current feature exhibit is We the People of Ames, which tells stories with national impact in honor of the United States' 250th anniversary this year. And in there, we're talking about not only one Henry Wallace, but we're actually talking about 2 in there. So you can come in and check that out. And we encourage everybody to come see that exhibit while it's up. It is a temporary exhibit. Tonight's lecture is the 3rd in a series of our 4 lectures this spring. Please visit our website, ameshistory.org, for more information about upcoming events, current exhibits, museum membership, and we also have membership brochures if you're interested in joining on the table over there. And we still have a few of those flyers for the lecture series that include our last topic. So feel free to grab one of those. Now I will invite Kathy Speck from the Ames History Museum up front to introduce our speaker.
Well, as Alex said, tonight's presentation is meant to enhance the current exhibit at the Ames History Museum. And just so you know, the museum is open Tuesday through Saturday, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. And we really hope that you will stop by. The exhibit will be up through October, which of course gives you plenty of time to come back several times. I had to do that myself. The information in that exhibit is intensive, and it takes a little while to get through it all, but it is well worth the time, and we hope you'll come. Once again, tonight's program is funded by Humanities Iowa, a private nonprofit state affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities and the State Historical Society of Iowa. If you go to the Humanities Iowa website, you can see the full roster of speakers available, and it really is most astonishing, the breadth of topics that are available at a very, very nominal fee for sponsoring organizations. But I want to talk about Tom Milligan. He has spent 45 years as a working theater artist in Iowa. His work as an actor, director, scenic designer, and producer has been seen throughout Iowa and the Midwest. Starting in 1973, many remember his work at Iowa's first dinner theater, Charlie's Showplace in Des Moines. Does anybody remember Charlie's Showplace? Lots of nodding heads out there. Over the years, Tom has been on the staff at the Des Moines Playhouse, the Ingersoll Dinner Theater, the Drake Opera, Hoyt Sherman Theater, the Drama Workshop, and many other venues in the Des Moines area. Now, in 2005, he moved to the Amana Colonies, working on multiple productions at the Old Creamery Theater and the Iowa Theater Artists Company, as well as many self-produced productions. I heard a little gasp at Old Creamery. Yes, a lot of us remember that. His 16-year association with Humanities Iowa reflects his passion for both theater and history through his unique one-man play presentations. Tonight we'll hear American Dreamer, The Life and Times of Henry A. Wallace. This one-act play is based on the award-winning book of the same name by Senator John Culver and John Hyde. And as a matter of fact, if you would be interested, there's a copy, the library's copy is sitting over there. You can check it out and take it home tonight if you'd like to do that. Tom will portray the agricultural innovator who became Pioneer Hi-Bred Company founder, the U.S. Secretary of Agriculture, and Franklin Roosevelt's vice president. Please welcome Tom Milligan.
Well, it's so nice to see so many people out here tonight. We don't get many visitors up here very often to Farview, so it's always nice to have someone stop by. Although I did have a reporter call me the other day. He said he wanted to ask me a few questions. I suppose he was writing one of those Where are they now kind of articles. Well, that's what most of the reporters who find their way out here are after. Well, I'll tell you the exact same thing I told him. Henry A. Wallace is right where he's always been, in his garden. I gardened at the beginning of things. I gardened in Washington, D.C. The more I saw of Washington, the better I thought of strawberries. I was once asked what the key was to successful gardening, and I know the audience was expecting a dissertation in genetics. I answered, sympathy for the plants. I thought I'd garden forever. Well, I can still run a half mile. I can still do 22 push-ups. I still play a fair game of tennis. I fully expected to be around for my 100th birthday. But I've been diagnosed with ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, Lou Gehrig's disease. Oh, it's a fascinating thing, really. I'll have a ringside seat to watch my own body disintegrate. I'm going to let the doctors do whatever they want to on me. It's a wonderful opportunity for research. I'm going to keep a diary. Reflections of an ALSer. Yeah, I'm going to fight this battle, this last battle with everything that I've got. Science, curiosity, endurance, and faith. I will regret not being able to get out into the fields. Of course, ALS will only stop me physically. I'll still be able to give my plants all the psychic input that I can manage. Well, I am a mystic. At least that's what some folks called me. President Roosevelt, he called me old man common sense. Others called me Mr. Editor, Mr. Secretary of Commerce, Mr. Secretary of Agriculture, Mr. Vice President. A Republican, a Democrat, a progressive, bitter, eccentric, ambitious, self-righteous, self-important, self-intoxicating, strange, a red, a fool, a dupe, and a few other things that I can't mention here. Those practical men of Washington, they called me a dreamer. And they were right. I have always felt that if you can envision something that hasn't been and bring it into this world, that is a tremendously worthwhile idea. The great books, the great inventions, the great ideas, they all began with a dream. And so they said one to another, behold, the dreamer comes. Genesis chapter 36, story of Joseph. Now, Joseph, he had 11 brothers, and they were not dreamers, and they hated him because he was. So one day the brothers just said to one another, well, let's just kill him. Throw his body down under the dry wells, and we shall see what becomes of his dreams. That's usually what happens to prophets and dreamers. They're tossed down dry wells, tossed off of cabinets, booted out of town, shut out of conventions. But a prophet does not go away quietly. And a dreamer does not stop dreaming. Not about peace, brotherhood, and the possibilities of man. And God hath made of one blood all the nations to dwell upon this earth. You know, those practical men of Washington, the party bosses, the insiders, the money men, they never could quite get a handle on me. Never could quite figure me out, figure out a way to get to me. And when people can't figure out a way to get to you, they become annoyed. I was annoying. In fact, I was probably most annoying when people realized that I didn't care what they thought of me. Well, no, that's not true. There was a time, that bitter time of lies and hatred, that time when to be for peace was wrong and to be for war was right. There was a time when I wanted people to know exactly who I was then and who I was not. I am not a wild-eyed firebrand. I am the quiet son of Iowa soil. I am not anti-American. I am not un-American. I am not a communist. I'm a progressive capitalist who believes in God. Look at these strawberries. They give the heart hope. I started raising strawberries when I was a boy. Tried to assign a portion of my garden to my brothers. They refused. They said, why should we have to take care of the strawberries just because you like them? Well, that's an honest question. When and why should anyone have to take up another's beliefs? Well, I'll tell you, when those beliefs are right. I never doubted myself when I was right. And I was right most of the time. I am a Wallace after all. Perhaps you've heard of my grandfather, Henry Wallace, no middle initial. The world called him Uncle Henry. He was the editor of the world's most important farm journal, Wallace's Farmer, apostrophe after the S. You know, when I was a boy, I didn't have to wonder what God was like as most children do. I knew he was like my grandfather, not the other way around. God, duty, agriculture. That was my grandfather's motto. To know my grandfather's motto is to know him, and to know my grandfather is to know me. What is the chief end of man? Well, that's what my grandfather used to ask me as we sat together on his fine front porch. The chief end of man is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. You know, my grandfather, he could have been Secretary of Agriculture, but he declined. He said that no Wallace had ever held an office higher than Justice of the Peace, and I don't want to mar the family record. My grandfather was a very wise man. Now, my father, Henry C. Wallace, he was Secretary of Agriculture under President Harding and then President Coolidge. When he went off to Washington, he wrote, "I will do the best I know." Well, he did better than that. 1920s were hard years in the Farm Belt, dark years. But my father, he fought hard for farm relief, and time again, he was frustrated by a Republican Congress and presidential vetoes, but even with the odds stacked against him, he battled on. 1924, Henry C. Wallace worked himself to death fighting for farm relief. After his funeral, I went back to my office at Wallace's Farmer, and I wrote these words. His battle for rural equality will continue. So will his fight for higher standards of living and better working conditions for the Iowa farmer. I wrote that Henry C. Wallace died with his armor on in a fight for a cause with which he loved, and I pledged to continue that fight. And by the summer of 1932, there was much fighting to be done. By the summer of 1932, the average farm income had dropped by more than 2/3. By the summer of 1932, 6 out of every 10 Iowa farms were mortgaged to survive, and many did not. By the summer of 1932, corn was so worthless that folks were burning it for heat rather than lugging it to market. By the summer of 1932, misery had moved into this heartland like an unwanted relative who just would not leave. Those quiet folks that worked their land, worshiped their God, loved their family, served their country, they were desperate. Every day I'd receive letters. What is there to do? What can I do? Why isn't Washington doing something? That there should be such want in the land of such plenty. So it was. And so it was that on August 10th, 1932, this registered Republican, this son of a Republican cabinet officer, this grandson of a Republican, was invited out to Hyde Park, New York, to have lunch with the Democratic presidential candidate. Now, I fully expected to find Franklin Delano Roosevelt a typical Easterner without much knowledge of the middle of this country and even less interest. I knew his legs were paralyzed. I knew he came from wealth. I fully expected to find a man pretty well worn out. But what I found was a man who was fresh and eager, ready to pitch into the farm problem at once. I knew that I found a man who didn't know all the answers, but was willing to find out those from anyone he could. I found a man of ideas, and ideas had always been very close to my heart. I came back to Iowa and started campaigning. With Roosevelt, the farmers have a chance. With Hoover, they have none. Franklin Delano Roosevelt won in a rout. And so a new prophet rose up over the land of Israel. He will promise to judge the poor fairly and defend the rights of the helpless. He will rule his people with justice and integrity. And for a while it was so. I was actually walking through Waterworks Park in Des Moines, Iowa, when I received my summons from the president by way of a Western Union bicycle messenger. He handed me the telegram. Franklin Roosevelt was asking me to become his Secretary of Agriculture. I wrote back, "Mr. President, your invitation can have only one reply. I appreciate the honor and accept the responsibility." Well, there was nothing else I could do. God, duty, agriculture. That had been my inheritance from the hour of my birth. From that moment on, I was a Wallace and a gentleman. That would be my glory and my burden. I was born on a 300-acre farm, 10 miles from county seat in Greenfield, Iowa. Well, that's who Henry A. Wallace is. First and foremost, I'm the son of a farmer. 1887 or so, my father, he sold 2 pigs and bought a surrey to take his wife to their new home. I came along about a year later. Well, not by surrey. My father, he was a good farmer, a smart farmer. He was an unlucky farmer. 1888, the year after my father took up farming corn, was selling for about 19 cents a bushel. I didn't know any of that, though. My days were filled with prairie flowers, sight of storm clouds rolling up against the summer sky. I can still feel the snap of the wind against my face on a bobsled ride to town. My mother, May Broadhead, she was a strict Methodist. She disapproved of tobacco, drank neither coffee nor alcohol. She thought salads were a newfangled notion being foisted upon America by women's clubs. I was every inch of Wallace, but I was also the son of May Broadhead. I always preferred milk. It was my mother that taught me how to read, how to plant seeds and worship God. Well, even today, I don't do one without thinking of the other. Well, after 5 years on the farm, my folks, they had 2 healthy children and not much else, so we decided that my father, he'd move us up to Ames, Iowa. Moved into a little shack down by the railroad track. He enrolled at the Iowa State Agriculture College. He finished 2 years in one, then he went on to become a professor on the faculty there. Those days in Ames, my best friend was a man by the name of George Washington Carver. He was 6 feet tall. I was 6 years old. Together we went on these botanizing expeditions. That's what he called them. So do you know about George Washington Carver? He was the son of slaves before he became a world-famous chemist. He invented literally hundreds of uses for the peanut and the sweet potato. Carver went over the Midwest, and years after the Civil War, but finally settled in Ames to become Iowa State's first black student. I didn't know many children, but I did know about plants. The boy who loved plants. That's what Carver called me. And as we wandered the fields together, we talked. George Washington Carver taught me that man must seek to understand all living things as much as he sought to understand steel, cement, and gas and oil. That God can speak to you from the parts of a flower or a blade of grass. You know, maybe I am a mystic. Same way that George Washington Carver was a mystic. He taught me to believe that God is present in all places and in all people. Well, as I was wandering the fields with Carver, one controversy or another forced my father off of the faculty at Iowa State and ousted my grandfather as the editor of the Iowa Homestead magazine. Both Henry C. and Uncle Henry without a job. Future seemed about as bleak as Iowa in the middle of February. But they came to their own rescue. They always did. Now, Henry C. knew that Uncle Henry, if he didn't have some sort of project to stand on, he would just likely shrivel up and die. So that's exactly what he gave his father. The project he took on, the platform he took, was a farm journal called Wallace's Farmer. Doesn't seem a very hopeful project, Henry C. wrote to a friend upon launching Wallace's Farmer, but on father's account, it's the only thing to do. Well, things went a little better than expected. Right from the beginning, it was a family operation. My grandfather was the editor. My father was the publisher. My uncles, they sold the advertising. My grandmother, she wrote the Heart and Homes page. Good farming, clear thinking, right living. That was its credo. Ran on the line right below the paper's title. In 6 words, it summed up what that newspaper stood for. Also summed up what the Wallaces stood for. 1898, the whole Wallace farm operation moved to Des Moines. I was only about 10 years old. I'd never been to school before. I didn't know many children, but you can never be lonely in a house full of brothers and sisters and a player piano. Now, we had an acreage in Des Moines. I was the oldest son, so I had chores to do. So what did I do? I had to pump water into the tanks, shovel coal into the furnace. I took care of the sow and her pigs and my uncle's horse from next door. My mother was always after me to change my clothes after I did my chores. She said she didn't want me to go to school smelling like a country boy. Usually I forgot or just didn't bother. There always seemed to be something of the country boy in me. There always seemed to be manure on my shoes, literally or figuratively. Oh, 1910, I graduated from Iowa State College. I finished the top of the school's agriculture division, if you're interested. Oh, 1914, I married Miss Ilo Brown. Ilo's the prettiest girl I'd ever seen. I met her first at a picnic. She said I made her feel secure, and she made me feel comfortable. Ilo's friends were always after her to do something about Henry, they'd say. Do something about his hair, it never seems to be combed. Or do something about the ties, it never matched the suits, it never seemed to fit. Well, Ilo told her friends that she didn't mind how I went about. She liked my good qualities, and that was enough for her. It's good for a man to have a woman who feels like that. I wasn't much of a suitor. No, I courted Ilo with numerous trips to the poultry barn and a fair amount of conversation about Chinese agricultural practices. At the wedding, the bride was described as regal and the groom as dazed. And that pretty well summed things up. You know, my grandparents, they had a home in Sherman Hill, the old Victorian neighborhood of Des Moines. A big wide porch, big wide steps. And I'd sit out there with my grandfather and we'd read aloud together. And we'd talk about clover and hogs and God. In solving the problems that will come up from day to day and from time to time, it is truly the man who is on God's side that is on the side of the majority. Although the world may doubt it, and he may never see it. Prosperity will appreciate the man who does the right as he sees the right. Now, that's not from the Bible. Just the closest thing to it. It was a letter that my grandfather wrote to me when I came of age, turned 21, that is, I was a senior at Iowa State. I remembered those words the rest of my life. During the 1948 campaign, I remembered them every day. I was 28 years old working as the editor at Wallace's Farmer when my grandfather died. Letters of sympathy came in from every important place around the world and every little town in the Farm Belt. At his funeral, his family, we gathered at his home there in Sherman Hill. And standing around his casket, we drew up the Wallace family covenant. And within that covenant, we promised to keep untarnished the family name. We promised to continue the good work that he had begun. And one by one, the sons and grandsons of Henry Wallace picked up his casket, put it on their shoulders, and carried it to his funeral. Religion is not a philosophy, but a life. That's what my grandfather wrote in his will. A life which forever tends towards harmony with the Creator. I believe these words to be true. I believe I learned what I learned as a boy sitting on my grandfather's fine front porch. I believe I learned what I learned as a boy walking the fields with George Washington Carver, that man best serves God through service to his fellow man. And the men that my grandfather cared most about were farmers. So I suppose my turn towards corn was a natural one. When I was 14, corn became my passion, maybe my obsession, most certainly my cause. And it remained so for the next 3 decades. You know, I hope you have a passion. A passion helps you through all of the rough spots. Yeah, you know, the thing about corn is that it was created by God in the glaciers to plump up our 4-footed animals and turn them into food. Well, the thing about corn is that it practically begs to be tinkered with. You know, it was the Native Americans that called corn our life. Yeah, I'm sure you know how it works. We need good seed, gives good corn, gives good seed, gives good corn, so on, so on, so on. Well, it was Ancus that started the perpetuation of corn through the process of visual selection. Well, what I mean is the farmers, they'd take their best looking ears and they'd set that aside and they'd just use that as seed for next year's crops. Yep. When I was a boy, corn was king. Now, they used to have these corn shows all around the country. Farmers, they'd take their best looking ears into the show ring and the judges would decide which ones were the prettiest and therefore the best. It's kind of like a beauty pageant. Yep. Corn was king and Reed Yellow Dent was the king of the corn. It was the prettiest corn in the Midwest. Corn was king, and its preacher and teacher was Perry G. Holden, the corn professor, the evangelist of corn. Well, he was like a one-man circus traveling around the country, judging corn shows and preaching to the multitude how to obtain a long and beautiful life through the beautiful virtues of Reed Yellow Dent. Well, there were a few skeptics to this, very few. Few scientists, handful of old-fashioned dirt farmers, and one shy, serious high school boy named Henry A. Wallace. Now, not that the rest of the Wallaces agreed with me. In fact, it was Wallace's farmer that paid for the corn professor to teach at Iowa State. So I just decided I'd enroll in one of his classes. For 2 weeks, I sat and I listened to the corn professor expound his words. They just didn't seem to make sense to me. So one day I raised my hand. Sir, I said, what's looks to a hog? Well, pretty much shocked the corn professor. Sent quite a jolt through the classroom as well. One of my friends said, Henry Wallace, you're only 15. What do you know? Well, I am 15 and I'm right. Well, the corn professor said, if you think I'm wrong, then prove it. I came home with a bag full of 33 ears of Reed Yellow Dent. That spring, I asked my father to give me 5 acres of land out behind the house. That summer, I walked my 33 rows of corn. That fall, I harvested the crops, I husked the ears, and I put them in numbered piles on the floor of my father's garage. That winter, I went back out to the garage. I stared, I waited. I just ached to know if what I thought was so. When the corn was dried, I shelled it, I weighed it, I figured the percentage of ear composed of cob, I estimated the weight lost through drying, I devised a ratio of whole fresh ear to pick dried corn. I'm sorry, did I lose you? I went back out to the garage. I filled up sheet after sheet with row after row of numbers. Math is a wonderful thing. I took the results to my family. I had proven that the ear that Holden had picked out as the prettiest was the worst in yield. And the one that he had picked out as the worst was the best in yield. So without a sword, with a sling and a stone and a soft lead pencil, David defeated Goliath. I have always said that neither corn nor men were ever meant to be completely uniform. Well, for the next 20 years or so after my dust up with the professor, not much changed for Iowa farmers. Corn was still pollinated by the breeze, still harvested by hand. Average yield was still about 19 bushels an acre, same as it had been when I was born in 1888. But all that was about to change. It all started in May of 1926 with a meeting of 9 friends in the basement of the Grant Club in Des Moines, Iowa. We started a company that night. That's what we did. The first company dedicated to the development, the production, and the sale of hybrid corn. It would come to be called Pioneer Hi-Bred. Our first year, Pioneer made profits of about $30. But all that was about to change too. Now, Roswell Garst, we never called him anything but Bob. He hailed from Coon Rapids. And I'll tell you, Bob Garst had a gift for gab. He could just sell darn near anything to anybody. So one day I gave Bob some hybrid corn. And I said, go home, try that out. So Bob and a high school pal of his, Charlie Rippey, they planted that hybrid corn in 2 rows, alternating with 2 rows of ordinary corn from the Rippey farm. Well, one summer day, a big gust of wind came by and blew down all the Rippey corn. The hybrid corn stood strong and tall. Like Paul on the road to Damascus, Bob Garst was converted on the spot. We struck a deal and sealed it with a handshake. You know, it wasn't easy trying to sell corn for $6 a bushel in the middle of the Depression. But even in that terrible time, our small band of apostles moved out and across the plains and the prairies, bringing with them the miracle of hybrid corn. It was a revolution as quiet as a cornfield on a windless summer day. We were preaching, but farm by farm by farm by farm, we changed agriculture forever. We fed the world. It wasn't easy to leave Iowa. It was just as difficult as it had been for my father 12 years before, but to save Iowa, I had to leave. I hit the ground running when I joined Roosevelt's cabinet in 1932, and it didn't stop, it seemed like, for years. That was just exactly the way I wanted it. When I arrived in Washington, the fog of panic was so thick over the Ag Department building that people were choking on it. Within hours of Roosevelt's inaugural, we'd set that place a-humming. Within hours, we'd carved out a plan. Within 3 weeks, we had crafted that plan into a farm bill, and in 3 months, that bill had become a law. Some people damned it. I didn't care. Others praised it. I didn't care. I only cared about the people who were too weary to give a damn. I woke every morning at 5 o'clock, walked 3 miles across Rock Creek Park to my office, and set about to work. Washington had never seen anything like Henry A. Wallace in action. Oh, the press, they had a field day with me. They took pictures of me staring into cornfields. They took pictures of me staring at farm animals. They wrote how I didn't like to ride in limousines and that my favorite meal was a cheese sandwich and a glass of milk. They wrote how one time they caught me walking across the Ag Department building barefoot after a tennis match. Now, I have to admit, I was a pretty graceless tennis player. I taught myself the game, and usually I won, though. I just beat them down with sheer perspicacity. Determination. Oh, they also wrote how one time I liked to spend my evenings working calculus problems, although I had to tell them they were wrong on that. Although I did like to relax by using efforts of multiple and partial correlation to determine the net regression lines defining the relationship of one variable to another. I lost the reporters on that one too. Oh, and one time they wrote, and I was vice president then, that in a hotel DC lobby, I saw a cameraman, a photographer, struggling to carry his equipment. So I walked over and I picked up his camera and I carried it out to the curb for him. Well, that just shocked folks. The next day, the newspapers reprimanded me by saying the vice president of the United States doesn't so much as reach for a telephone directory, let alone fetch and carry for a man without a title. Well, I said, you know, I'm from the Midwest, and we think about things a little differently out there. 1936 campaign, I campaigned all over for Roosevelt. When he came to Des Moines, I was with him. 200,000 people lined the streets of Des Moines as the motorcade rolled by. You saved our farm. Well, that's what they yelled at us as we rolled by. You saved our farm. You know, that's what all of that had been for. The meetings held, the hours spent, the time, the money. You saved our farm. That November, Roosevelt won all the farm states and just about everything else. After the election, I took a trip across the back roads of the Mississippi Delta and the Great Smoky Mountains and into the hollows of Appalachia. How are the crops? Well, that's what I yelled at people working out in the field. How are your crops? I'd knock on doors of tumble-down shacks with no windows and big gaping holes in the roof. How are things with you folks? Do your kids go to school? Do they get enough milk to drink, enough fruit, enough vegetables? It's painfully clear they didn't. You know, most times people didn't even know who I was, and that's the way I wanted it. I wanted to hear the truth. Well, when a reporter would tell them what my name was and my title was, they just wouldn't believe it. They didn't think that an important man from Washington could be sitting in the middle of their kitchen. I went to their church services on Sunday. I listened to their sermons. I sang their old hymns. How are things with you folks? I came back to Washington ashamed. Subsistent farmers, landless tenants, day laborers, sharecroppers, they make up 1/2 of this nation's agricultural workforce and only receive 12% of our national farm income. We will change that. And we did. We formed the Farm Security Administration dedicated to combating rural poverty. We formed the Soil Conservation Act to save the voiceless land, as my grandfather had called it. In that time and in that place, people stopped asking, what is in this for me? And instead, they started asking, what is in this for all of us? Those practical men of Washington, the party bosses, the insiders, they talked about that trip down south. They said, Henry Wallace goes off on tangents. They were right. They said, Henry Wallace is a dreamer, and they were right. In their smoke-filled offices in D.C., I dreamed of the clean, clear Iowa air and the way the world should be. And when I tried to put those dreams into action on this earth, those practical men of Washington called me unwittingly, unknowing. Walter Lippmann, the preeminent columnist of his day, wrote that I was an isolated person to whom the shape of the real world is not clear. Well, let me tell you something, Mr. Lippmann. A farmer, any farmer, knows the shape and the sense of the real world better than any columnist. Come to me in my garden, Mr. Lippmann, and pull some weeds. Or come with me and drive out into the countryside and sit at a farm wife's table and talk to her husband about the price of corn. Or come down south with me, Mr. Lippmann, and see the ragged children working in the field, living on nothing but corn and molasses, and then you tell me who it is that knows the sense of the real world. (1940). Franklin Roosevelt seeking his third term in the White House. And he's starting to float my name around. Party bosses all had the same reaction. Anyone but Wallace. No, he's not one of us, they said. They were right. He has no it, they said. And they were right. I actually think it was my lack of it that appealed to the president. Franklin Roosevelt once said, there's something very genuine about a man who would give the president of the United States seed corn as an Easter gift with specific directions on when, where, and how to use it. Anyone but Wallace. So all the party bosses were saying at the 40 convention, anyone but Wallace. But the president prevailed. He always did. So Wallace was on the ticket. You know, I campaigned all over the country. It's kind of an interesting way of life, but I met a lot of really nice people. Time magazine did a cover story on me. They called me the unconventional candidate, and I imagine I was. They called me the Will Rogers of intellectuals. I like that. And so on election night, Roosevelt and Wallace won 33 states and 449 electoral votes. Pretty definitive win. But we didn't carry Iowa. Well, I'll have to admit that rankled. President Roosevelt, he tried to calm me down by saying all his national elections, he'd never carried his own hometown, but it still rankled. And so at a few minutes past noon, a cold January day, 1945, Henry A. Wallace became the 33rd Vice President of the United States. My first official act was to remove the bar from the office of the Vice President. The second was to remove the urinal. Didn't need to see the need for the latter without the former. I tried to equip myself with as much information and knowledge as I could about the duties and the powers and the office of Vice President. I soon learned there were none. Oh, the president, he does preside over the Senate, one of the more futile jobs I've ever had. I presided as little as possible. I tried to interest the senators into the gym with me to spar. One, Evan Ellender from Louisiana, ever took me up on it. And after I knocked him out, nobody else would get back in the ring with me. I started going out to Potomac River Park every morning to throw the boomerang for exercises. And the press, they were always trying to get a story. So one day, just as I let fly, this photographer, he knelt down right in front of me waiting to get a picture, but he didn't think to turn around and look around behind him, and that boomerang came right back around, hit him right smack in the back of the head. I'll have to admit, I surely did apologize. But it was a pretty nifty way to take out a member of the press. My sister, she was married to the head of the Swiss legation there in D.C., and she arranged for me to use some ground on their embassy there for a victory garden. Every morning I'd go back out there and I'd put my hands in the soil again, and I knew who I was, why I was. The president appointed me the chief of the Economic Board of Warfare. It was the first time in U.S. history that a vice president had been given any serious administrative duties. What Roosevelt needed to win that war, I gave him. 1944. Franklin Roosevelt seeking his fourth term in the White House. Everybody knows that. Everybody also knows he's an ill man. Whoever wins the vice presidential nomination would most certainly ascend to the White House. Now, who would that be? Anyone but Wallace. I knew that the party found me too controversial. I knew they were trying to dump me off the ticket, but I wasn't worried. After all, I had Roosevelt's word that he was behind me. July 10th, I went to the president and I said, if you were a delegate, would you vote for Wallace for vice president? And he said, yes, of course. July 12th, I went to the president and I said, am I being shoved off of this ticket? And he reached up and he took me by my hand and pulled me down next to where he was sitting and said, I hope it will be the same old team. And I believed him. July 20th, I stood stiff-necked in front of the National Democratic Convention. I knew I was staring straight into the face of the enemy, but there was a few things I wanted them to hear. The future belongs to those who go down the line for democracy, regardless of race, sex, or religion. The poll tax must go. Equal educational opportunities must be here. The future belongs to those who will give equal work for equal wages, regardless of sex or religion. With a prayer for prompt victory in this war, permanent peace, and full employment, I second the nomination of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. The demonstration for the president went just as the party bosses had planned, and then suddenly something unexpected happened. Unscripted, unplanned, definitely unordered. The convention suddenly erupted for me. Now, Samuel Jackson, the convention chairman, he was back up at the podium. He banged his gavel, order, I will have it. But the people would not be quiet. They wanted reaction right then, right there. They wanted Wallace. Now, Robert Hannigan, the chairman of the Democratic Party, was standing next to Hannigan, or to Jackson. He shouted, adjourn the session. He said, I can't, the crowd is too hot. Now, Senator Claude Pepper of Florida knew that if he could get my name in front of the crowd that night, at that moment, with them yelling my name with my voice, ringing off the laughter of my name, that I'd win the nomination by popular acclaim. Claude knew it, Hannigan and Jackson knew it, everybody in the crowd knew it. Claude, he started his way for the podium. He elbowed aside the party bosses, the insiders, the money men of Washington. Now, at the base of the steps leading to the podium, there was a gate. It was guarded by a Union man, a Wallace man, and even though the party bosses gestured frantically not to let Claude by, that's exactly what the guard did. Claude Pepper was one step away from the podium, one step away from placing Henry A. Wallace of Iowa back on the ticket, and if he had Wallace, was one weary heartbeat away from the White House. You know, at that time, in that moment, there was only one man who could stop me. There was only one man the party bosses and the insiders would listen to, and that one man had already told Robert Hannigan exactly what he wanted. You're taking your orders from me, Hannigan screamed at Jackson, and I'm taking my orders from the President of the United States. And with that, Jackson, he banged his gavel. I call for a vote of adjournment, and the crowd roared back, no, 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 the ayes have it, the ayes have it, the ayes have it. And with that, the power was shut off to the organ, the lights were dim, the session was over, and that was that. Throughout the night, cold cash changed hands. Favors were handed out. And the next day, Wallace of Iowa was off of the ticket, and Truman of Missouri was on. I tried to take it well. I am a Wallace after all. The last time I saw the president was in April, after the inauguration. It was a dinner party at the White House, and he had just appointed me Secretary of Commerce. He seemed tired, but in high spirits. That night I would have a dream, the same dream I would have in the days to come. And in that dream, I'm walking with the president, in a field, and he's using neither his wheelchair or leg braces or crutches. We're walking together freely in the remembered fields of my childhood. 3 weeks later, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was dead. My political career came to a crashing halt with the presidential primaries and candidacy of 1948. After the war, trouble was still stirring. The threat of communism was still there. I was asked to become the presidential candidate for the Progressive Party. Now, the Progressive Party is the party of the people, the union worker, the homemaker. The Progressive Party will be funded by people, not organizations. As candidate of the Progressive Party, I refuse to speak in segregated halls, eat in segregated restaurants, or sleep in segregated hotels. What we have is to show the world a better way. And that's what we have here in America. The First Amendment, the Bill of Rights, real democracy. Mounted police, they plowed their way through my demonstrations. They cracked heads, they dragged supporters off to jail. My running mate, Glenn Taylor, was thrown into a jail in Alabama for going into an entrance marked coloreds only. But still, we persisted. We had to tell them what we stood for. And on election night, we didn't receive a single electoral vote. After the 48 campaign, Ilo and I came back up here to Farview, our farm here in upstate New York. I needed to work with my hands again. I needed to come out here every morning and seeing things would be green and have an order to them. And in knowing just that, I'd be able to go on. I needed to remember the secret. Take up gardening. You have to go on to see what comes up next year. We got quite an experimental little farm here. Got a wonderful research library. Ilo, she plies me with homemade biscuits and apple butter jam. We've got 15,000 chickens. I'm on the quest to breed the perfect chicken to lay the perfect egg. Ilo says that the chickens are starting to overrun my life. Well, that's not true. Now I've got my tomatoes, strawberries, eye-popping gladiola, Chinese cabbage, ultra-rich in vitamin C, you know. Then I travel some, Europe, Latin America, Mexico, Guatemala. I've set up research facilities there to help the farmers increase their ag production. And I still like to disappear into my own fields every once in a while. Whosoever shall make 2 blades of grass or 2 ears of corn grow on a spot where only one has grown before will deserve better of mankind and more essential service to his country than a whole race of politicians put together. I didn't write that. It's from Gulliver's Travels, but I believe it to be true. The highest aspiration that a human can have is to increase the quality of life for mankind. And that's what scientific knowledge, scientific research does for us. It improves the quality of life. Corn breeding, germplasm, disease-resistant nutrition, I am interested in all of it still. I am still a man at play in the fields of the Lord. Say, if you have just a minute, there is one more story I'd like to tell you. This may be my last chance to get things down, get things straight. Okay? All right. Well, it was just after the election in 45. And the president, he invited me to lunch at the White House. And we had lunch on the lawn under the shade of a big old magnolia tree. And we talked about the convention in Chicago. And he told me about how in 1932 he'd run up against the same problem that I'd run up against in 1944. About how he didn't have enough electoral votes to win the nomination. About how he made a deal with John Nance Garner of Texas to have the votes make him the vice president in exchange for the votes from his home state, and about how Garner took him up on it. The president looked at me and he said, he got what he wanted. I got what I wanted. You might have done the same. And I looked at the president, the man that I'd cast my lot with so many years before when so many things seemed possible. And I said, well, Mr. President, I could have made a deal too, but I did not care to. And that's what it all comes down to. That's who Henry A. Wallace is, finally and forever. A man who would not barter away his principles, no matter the price. Well, time I was going in. Corn, chickens, tomatoes, strawberries. All have much to occupy me these days and these coming days. I will fight for my life to my final breath. I am a Wallace after all. I'm sorry, what? What have I learned from this adventurous life of mine? Well, I've never been asked that before, but I know this to be true. The land does not disappoint. God does not disappoint. And it is in our dreams that we will live forever. Good night.
I think he's going to do questions here in just a
Yeah.
minute, so nobody run away yet.
I have no answers, so. Oh my. So, anybody learn anything about Henry Wallace you didn't know before tonight? All right. I'm an advocate for good theater should entertain you and educate you all at the same time. So, your turn. This is we were talking earlier. This is my 28th year of touring this show. We've been a lot of places with this around the Midwest and Washington, D.C. and all sorts of places. It, for some reason, seems to draw a lot of interest right now. Not quite sure why that is. Maybe we'll find out. So anyway, my name is Tom Milligan. I've been to Ames before. I do two other shows. I do Grant Wood and Ding Darling. I also did for about 2 years, I did Christian Peterson from the sculptor guy. We were hired by, I should shout out to the playwright, Cynthia Mercati, who wrote what I just said. She likes to remind me that I am merely the empty vessel from which the words flow. She wrote the show. We used Senator Culver's book for all the reference, which is why it has the name that it does. It's a good read. It's a big read. It's more than I just gave you. So anyway, I'm just chatting here. So questions or answers? Yes. Oh, yeah.
My question is, do you know what Wallace would have thought if he had been vice president and became president and was faced with the decision to bomb Japan at the end of World War II? What would have happened in what you know? Thank you.
I know exactly. He was, when I said what the president needs to win that war, I gave him, he was 100% firm believer in the Manhattan Project. Now, do I think he would have dropped the bomb? I think he would have probably knocked the top off of Mount Fuji and said, look what we can do in a very kind of more of a peaceful way. We have this power and we can use it, but we're not going to. Kind of to tag into that same question, the most frequently asked question that I have is if he had become president, what kind of president would he have been? And I always like to look at it and say he probably would have been the kind of president that Jimmy Carter was, in the fact that he really couldn't get much done because nobody really believed in him as president, couldn't get that past you, but did wonderful things after he left the office. And that's what Henry still continued to do. You have to realize that he was, he was, you know, the communist thing, the blacklisting, all that stuff. Henry was number one on the list. He was, because the story goes that he was still Secretary of Commerce. There was a meeting at the White House to discuss sharing the secrets of the atomic bomb with Russia. And Henry said, no, that's nothing that we want to do. What we want to do is, these people are starving. We need to give them tractors. We need to give them plows. We need to give them seeds. We need to give them a way to feed themselves, because people who are not hungry have a tendency to fight a lot less. The very next day, the newspapers ran a story saying that the only one in that room that said we should share the secrets of the atomic bomb with Russia was Henry Wallace. Total lie, total lie. But that set him up as being this communist. So when he ran for the Progressive Party in 48, there was all this blacklisting and stuff that was starting to happen. Well, Henry was right in the middle of it. And so he spent years, the only other time he went back to Washington, D.C. Was he attended JFK's inaugural at one point, but he let that all go. So yes, he was a firm supporter of the Manhattan Project, yeah.
I've got the mic.
Hi. And this is just a matter of pure speculation because Henry Wallace passed away long before this. But I'm thinking of Iowa here in 2026. And I know Henry Wallace talked about the importance of being able to, you know, grow more corn, get better hybrids and so on. But what would he think of all the fertilizers and all the things that are used that end up in rivers and going downstream and, you know, killing fish and all other living things, say in the Mississippi River and also in other rivers? We've got great yields, but at what cost?
You know, I don't know how to answer that because I can't. I mean, Henry died in 1965.
Yeah.
Henry was always the smartest guy in the room. And one of the things that Roosevelt said to him at one point in time was, you know, everything that you want is going to happen, except it's just not going to happen now because you are too far ahead of everybody else to make it work. And so to answer your question about that, I'm not exactly sure. I think his thing of getting more yield and better production and things like that, that was always I was down in Orient at the Henry's birthplace, and I'd been down there several times, and I came in one time to do a show down there, and when I came in, there was like 5 new wind turbines out there in the middle of the field. And somebody asked me what I think Henry would think about that. And I thought, all I could answer was, is it being productive? Is it working? Is it saving energy? All these questions that he would have had, is it doing that? Then it's probably going to work. That's a tough question. Somebody like that's just so far ahead of what's going on. You talk about getting the most out of it. Some of the projects that he had when he was Secretary of Agriculture were very controversial because the government paid farmers not to farm, not to plant corn, and to terrace their fields and take out farm. So here, but that was 1920s were really kind of ugly years here in Iowa. There was a judge in northern Iowa that was pulled out of the courtroom and almost hung because he was administrating all these foreclosures on these farms. There was really nothing that they could do. So, well, hard to say. Speculation.
As Pioneer developed and grew, what was his relationship with that company then?
He didn't have much of a relationship with the company after he went to DC. Excuse me, just kind of more of on an advisory capacity. The family started several research facilities in and around the DC area. One of them still is operating there. I think his grandson operates it. And his daughter operated it for a long time. No, he kind of let that go and let it go. It's kind of an interesting thing because his influence was still there so much. Because if you went to visit Henry at Farview, the farm, when they retired, he talked about the 15,000 chickens. So he was literally on the quest to be the perfect chicken to lay the perfect egg. So if you went to visit him, he'd take you on a tour of the farm and he'd say, okay, well, let's go see the chickens. So you go over here and say, now this group of chickens over here, they're not doing very well. We're having struggling with these, with the egg size, color, velocity, viscosity, all that stuff. Then this group here in the middle, now they're not too bad at all. They're getting there. But this group over here, this is my high line. And that eventually became Highline Chicks. And Henry's son, HB, ran Highline Chicks but it also became part of Pioneer. Pioneer is now so diversified, it's now Contiva or something like that. It was originally bought by DuPont, was the first purchase, and then now it's gotten a little weird. But
I have a question from online. In your years of performing this piece, has your understanding of Wallace changed in any way? And also, have you noticed that audiences have been attracted to different aspects of his story over time?
Well, that's a good question. Never been asked that before. I think that in the research that we did, there's obviously you have the definitive book that we did the research from that is definitely has an angle to it, because that was Senator Culver when he wrote the book. His plan was to remove the stigma that was around him as being a communist, and it successfully did that. But if you look at all the other stuff, what really attracted me to Henry was his need to improve the life for what he called the common man. And that's everybody that's sitting here. It's things like, expecting the dissertation in genetics. His answer was just have some sympathy for the plant, and take that type of stuff. I think within the last, I'll say 10 years, there's been a lot of interest in this show and swinging more towards the political element of it than the ag element of it. I like the ag element of it, but I also like to get into the political side of things too, because it's a period of time in history that a lot of you in this audience probably remember, that we've fought out of, and we're kind of seeing where we are right now today.
Over
Yes.
here, Tom. I assume he continued as Secretary of Commerce through Truman's?
No.
No?
No.
What happened?
He hated Truman.
Oh,
Well, obviously there was a conflict between the two of them because they were both in the same office. Truman didn't realize what was going on. Truman didn't even realize what was going on with the atomic bomb. So when he got there, it was like, what we have that? Holy cow. What are we going to do with that thing? So no, there got to be one of my favorite video or clips of Henry is him sitting at his desk at wherever the office building he is. And he is resigning as Secretary of Commerce. And because he had found out that Truman was going to fire him. So he stepped up and said, well, I'm going to. So it's Henry sitting there doing this big thing and writing this, and he picks it up, looks at the camera, and just throws it in the outbox. And it's like, there, take that. But that was, yeah. He only lasted about less than a year as that Secretary of Commerce. Yeah. There wasn't really much for him to do. What was your question, sir?
Easy one. I'll talk loud.
Yeah.
Online.
This is easy. Has anyone ever said you look a bit like FDR?
Yes.
Yeah.
I played FDR about
Kept
4
watching
times.
you and I kept
Yeah.
on-
I've done Annie several times. I did Sunrise at Campobello at the Des Moines Drama Workshop. We had the opportunity to take this show out to Washington, D.C. back in 2001. We performed for it was the Wallace family reunion. And who knew that there was a theater in the Ag Department building in Washington, D.C., but there is. It's a very nice little theater. So we had about 300 seats. So we set up there. We had a show for the family, which was about 140 people. It's kind of terrifying looking in the audience and seeing about half of them that look like Henry looking back at you. And then the rest of it, we opened it up to the public and just did 4 other shows. While we were there, the Wallace family had donated a bunch of cash to Hyde Park to make a Henry Wallace Visitors Center at Hyde Park. So all of the executive director of the Hyde Park Foundation and a couple of other people came down and saw the show. And we went to the first night, we went out to one of the guy that had the research facility. We went out to his house in Alexandria and had a big picnic and party and all this stuff. And individually, all 3 of them came up to me and said, have you ever thought doing Franklin Roosevelt? You look amazing on fire. I get that a lot. We had as I said, Cynthia Mercati wrote the show. She was there that night. And one of the funniest things I ever see, the grandson walked us out to the car when we were leaving. And he gets out there and he said, I liked your show. I did. I really did. Senator Culver standing here. And he said, but I'll have to admit, I don't think Grandpa would have talked that much about himself. Now, if you know Cynthia Mercati, by this time there's smoke rolling out of her ears. And she just looks at him and says, well, it's kind of hard to write a 1-person show if the one person doesn't say anything. One of my favorite lines. Anything else?
You mentioned taking it to Washington, D.C.
Yes.
Have you ever taken it to either of the places in Missouri, the George Washington Carver Farm or the Truman Library?
No. I can't, well, obviously why? I have a hard time I haven't even been to Herbert Hoover Library. They don't want me. They don't want Ding Darling. I don't know why they don't want Ding Darling, dude. We get around a little bit with this. The one that gets the most attention nationwide is I do one on J.N. Ding Darling, Pulitzer Prize winning cartoonist for the Des Moines Register for 52 years. Well-known, nationally known conservationist. That gets me a little bit more. As we talked earlier, we're headed down to Sanibel Island in October for 4 days for the Ding's 150th birthday. And yeah, he gets me around a little bit more.
Did he ever talk to Harry Truman? Did he ever talk to Harry Truman?
No.
Or was it just they hated each other?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, this was back when, politics were different back then. I mean, I remember, I'm old enough to remember you could go 2 weeks without knowing what the president was really doing. So it was a little different. I mean, they attended cabinet meetings. They had this cordiality about them. Henry was not he was kind of a spiritual guy. That was part of the problem was we talked about being a mystic, he kind of followed this he kind of lost his Presbyterian ways and kind of followed this guy who was this kind of guru type of thing, and everybody, looked at that. But once he left Washington, D.C., he never went back to Washington. The only time he went back was I saw a film clip of this. It was kind of interesting. It was I guess the Supreme Court hosts a breakfast brunch the day of the inaugural. So there's video, old video, black and white video of this, and the commentators going, and here's so-and-so, and here's so-and-so. Oh, and here comes Henry A. Wallace. And you have to realize that Henry died in 65. So he's right on the verge of just discovering his ALS. And he's just kind of working his way down through the line, getting his food. But that was the only time he ever went back to Washington, D.C. He totally left that whole thing behind. Yeah.
Okay.
Were he and Norman Borlaug, were they the same era? And if so,
No, not really.
different eras?
Henry had already left by that time. Now they did work together to a degree. And a lot of people ask me, why don't you mention the Green Revolution and this and well, Henry was already dead by that time, so that was. But Norman was a young man at the time, so they had their. It was kind of like the relationship between George Washington Carver and Henry and Norman Borlaug. It's kind of the same basis there. Yeah.
We know he started Pioneer, but you said he didn't really get back to it when he came back. But was he a wealthy man from owning Pioneer?
Yeah, I would suppose he was, I would think. Yeah.
Depends when he sold it.
No, that doesn't mean he wasn't a shareholder and still some active participant in Pioneer, but yeah, it's Pioneer's kind of interesting. It's gotten really big. I had the first time I did this was 25 years ago. I did it out at Living History Farms for Pioneer's 75th anniversary. And we're at 100 years right now. And it was interesting because we hadn't really written the show. And so we thought, well, what could we do? What 7 minutes could we do? So we thought, well, let's write something about May of 1926 with the meeting of the 9 friends in the basement of Grant Club. Name them all and do all this stuff. So I get out to Living History Farmers, and the place is packed. And it's all Pioneer people. And there's a stage set up down in kind of this little outdoor amphitheater thing. And I said, where am I supposed to be anyway? And I was working with the Des Moines Playhouse, and they had dressed me in these pants and suspenders and kind of shirt and a kind of bowler hat and all this stuff. I didn't know what I was doing. And they said, well, go down there and talk to that big guy down there on the stage. Well, I get down there, and the big guy is Merlin Olsen, football player who became their spokesman for a long time. So I walked up and introduced myself, and he said, oh, you're Henry. I said, okay. I said, what are we supposed to be doing here today? He says, well, I think I'm introducing you. You are introducing Rick O'Connell, who is the current owner or the president of Pioneer. And he is introducing the new president of DuPont, who like 2 months earlier had purchased Pioneer. So here comes Rick O'Connell over. We're talking, and finally somebody says, does anybody know the president of DuPont? Like, where is this guy anyway? And so there was this guy sitting over here. So we went over and got him, and it was him. So he came over, he sat down. And so we did this, we went through this whole thing. And at the end of it, there's a whole bunch of people wandering around, and there's a picnic table sitting over here. And there is Paul Newland, who is sitting at this picnic table. He's about 98 years old. He was the sole remaining of the 9 that was there that day. And somehow I ended up sitting right directly across from him. And he just kind of sat there and just stared me down. And I thought, oh boy. So finally, he looked at me and he said, Henry never wore suspenders. And I thought the reviews are in. All right. Took those suspenders off immediately. So. We've gone way too long, haven't we?
Tom Milligan, give him a big round of applause. Thank you so much.